Well, welcome. My name is Ken Schlenker, and I am the Director of Chaplaincy Programs for Grace School of Theology and the founder of CareForce US. I'm also a Master Trainer for Living Works programs that together help create suicide-safer communities. Today's program, Suicide Talk, is one resource developed by Living Works to explore suicide awareness, commitments to suicide prevention, and dedication to life protection. Prior to today, this morning, you were sent three different handouts. One was an exploration worksheet. One was a feedback form, and another handout for use during this presentation. When we complete the presentation today, there is a certificate of completion that's available, along with a number of other handouts that I will discuss in the end of this presentation. In order to receive that, we will need you to fill out your feedback form and to send it back to me. My email was in the email that you received the original handouts. Once I receive that, I can generate your certificate of completion and send the other handouts that will be mentioned during this presentation. So thank you for attending. Some of you may know or suspect that you are at risk yourself, or that you may know someone who is a person at risk. And there's a high probability that some of you may have also suffered losses from suicide. This presentation, the session, will have information for both types of situations. And for those of you that are survivors, I expect that it could be difficult to learn things that you wish you had known before. This session's goal is to encourage the entire community to develop a fuller understanding of suicide prevention and life promotion, along with a more supportive attitude towards them. But please note that Suicide Talk is not about learning suicide alertness or intervention skills. I will, however, explore the needs of persons at risk and how they might be addressed. Safe Talk and Assist, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, are examples of training programs for learning those suicide helping skills. Today's session is going to revisit and visit again this question: should we talk about suicide? This session is organized around many of the different things that question can refer to. It's therefore really more of an exploration than a presentation. I hope that you'll agree that we need to talk about suicide and to put our beliefs into action. Suicide Talk is the belief that suicide should be talked about seriously, with openness, honesty, and respect for anyone who has faced or could be facing suicide in their lives. The first problem for those that respond, yes, we should talk about suicide, is finding someone to talk to. S-talk is the avoidance of open and honest talk about suicide. Talking openly about suicide is in a comfortable and thoughtful manner helps to shatter the secrecy surrounding it. When this message is prominently displayed, those seeking it are more likely to come to talk with you if they have thoughts of suicide. Others watch what we do and draw inferences based on those observations. Observing S-talk may cause observer who are at risk to conclude that they should go elsewhere for help, or even that no help is available. I mean, where you're at right now, just say out loud a sentence using the word suicide. If you're having trouble thinking of that, just say, I'm at this presentation dealing with suicide if you can't think of anything else. Pretend that someone else can overhear you and that you want what you say to be encouraging of them to talk openly, honestly, and respectfully about suicide. Knowledge about the number of suicidal behaviors is generally very poor. There's a common notion that suicide behavior is relatively rare, and thus many will never encounter it. Associate that notion with S-talk. Let's explore if this is correct, though. Generally, people living in most communities are not aware that suicide is a serious community health problem. Community awareness is often just as blank as this slide. Indeed, as we learn how common suicide is, the picture develops may reveal even more. So one of the questions that we might want to consider is, why is there stigma, taboo, and silence around suicide? We avoid suicide because we're scared of it. But because we're scared of it, we are afraid because we avoid it. So I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a census right now. If your answer is yes to the next few questions, all you need to do is to raise your hand. This is a picture of a number of completed suicides per year. At this level of resolution, the number of suicides seems scattered and hardly noticeable. That number is equal to all of the people dying from traffic accidents and far exceeds the numbers dying from homicide. On a world scale, it's more than all the people dying in all the armed conflicts going on in the world in any given year. Again, suicide is a serious community health problem. So I just want to ask this question. Do you know someone who died or might have died by suicide? Just think about that for a second. For every suicide among some age groups, there may be as many as 100 suicidal behaviors that fortunately do not end in death. The injuries due to suicide behaviors occur as often or more than motor vehicle injuries in some places, and far outnumber any other kind of injury. So our suicide picture is starting to become a little bit clearer. Here's the next question. Do you know someone who injured themselves with suicide in mind? 1 in every 17 people, which is between 5 and 7% of the population, think about completing suicide each year. Our awareness of suicide as a serious community health problem is really now starting to come into focus. Here's the next question. Do you know someone who has had or whom you now suspect has had thoughts of suicide? How many people are affected by suicidal act? Well, at this resolution, we're only envisioning a few people being impacted, but the estimate of the impact is likely a fairly big understatement. Our next question, do you know someone, including you, who is or has been personally impacted by suicide? Everyone is likely to be impacted by suicide in one way or another in their lifetime. When we add the impact of suicide over lifetimes, and it fills rooms just like this one with people concerned about suicide, it is very likely that all of us will be touched by it in one way or another. So what does this exactly say about suicide? One of the things I think it says is what the sign on this slide now says. Suicide is part of being human. It could happen to any of us. To accept this reality is not to diminish us. It is instead to free us of the blinders that reduce our ability to help others and ourselves. Take a moment to remember the face or faces that go with what you just shared about your lifetime experience with suicide. Despite this overwhelming sense that suicide has or will intrude in all of our lives, some might claim that one does not have the right to talk about talk without clear permission to do so. So take a look at this slide. What is happening? One person is saying, should I tell? And the other person is saying, should I ask? This situation of knowing or could know does not happen unless both parties want it to happen. The person at risk or the person with thoughts of suicide is sending invitations that causes the potential helper to suspect that suicide could be involved. The potential helper is sending back invitations that they may be interested in helping. Either could do something opposite. The person at risk could hide all the signs of distress. The potential helper could show indifference, hostility, casualness, or any number of other things that would discourage the person at risk from talking about suicide with them. Let's look even deeper into the situation. What is happening here does not occur by accident. If a person at risk wants to tell you about their thoughts of suicide, there are reasons why they pick you to talk to. You are inviting them even though you may not be fully aware of it. You could have easily found ways to turn them away or turn them off had you wished to do so. If you're just about to ask about suicide, there are reasons why you sense that you should. A part of the other person is inviting you to talk openly, even though they may not be fully aware that they are doing so. After all, a person with thoughts of suicide really didn't want help. They could hide any signs of being at risk from you. Most all of the time, taking opportunities are not about the right to privacy, the right to non-interference, or the right to seek or give help. Indeed, not about rights at all. The fact that you are even thinking of talking is because invitations have likely already been made both ways. The real question is whether or not you're going to accept and act upon these invitations. So let's explore what's going on here. So here's the question. Why, if they want to die by suicide, would they tell anyone that's what they are thinking? Just take a moment to think on that. If they really fully wanted to die, no doubts, no reasons to hesitate, they had better not let anyone know because that anyone might stop them. So why do you think that time and time again, for the vast majority of people with thoughts of suicide, they in fact tell others that they are thinking about suicide? There's only one possible answer. Part of them is not sure. They want help. They need help. They cannot decide. Can you imagine having those mixed feelings of a part of you wanting to die and another part that is not sure? Sounds like a perfect recipe to tell someone to reach out for someone to talk with. Part of the issue, though, is those signs are being missed, dismissed, or avoided by others, which just pushes the person further down into feeling helpless and withdrawing and eventually taking their life. So when we look at this, I need to openly tell someone about my thoughts of suicide, and I would like to tell several people. People at risk or persons who might come to be at risk have a need to tell several people about these thoughts in as open a way as feels safe. It's important that they get the help telling others about thoughts of suicide in the first step of this process. If you're having thoughts of suicide, or if you ever could come to have thoughts of suicide, there's one very important thing you can do to help yourself. Do not face it alone. Tell someone. Several potential helpers are always better. Make sure that the helpers know about each other. When we look at I'm aware that I may be cautious in saying it as openly as I want to. Question begs itself why people at risk don't always tell others about their thoughts of suicide in the clearest of ways, the ways that they would prefer. Part of it is the feeling that they'll be rejected, that they won't be taken seriously, that they'll panic, they'll be patronized, they'll quickly turn them over to someone else. They'll immediately force them to go to the hospital. They won't listen to me, and a host of other reasons. What we're basically looking for, what they are looking for, is a loving, caring, and concern and serious response with no signs of avoidance or rejection. So I want to have you do a mental exercise here. I want you to think of someone you could tell if you were ever to have thoughts of suicide. Just take a moment. Maybe someone comes immediately to mind, or maybe you might want to think about whom they would tell later, or maybe both. Imagine letting yourself feel worthy of receiving help and feeling that the person wanting to help very much wants to help. So how can we invite a person to tell us about their thoughts of suicide? Maybe, perhaps, we can help by doing something to invite them to tell us. Is there any way that you can think of that would make that easier? So even when invitations are evident, some may avoid direct talk about suicide for fear that it's too personal or threatening an issue to talk about directly. Most inhibiting of direct talk is a notion that talking about suicide with someone who isn't having thoughts of suicide could cause them to start thinking about it. There is no evidence at all to support that notion. Even when invitations are evident, some may avoid direct talk about suicide for fear that it's too personal or threatening an issue to talk about directly. Most inhibiting of direct talk is the notion that talking about suicide with someone who isn't having thoughts of suicide could cause them to start thinking about it. There's, again, no evidence at all to support that notion. Asking the question about suicide is actually a win-win situation. Everyone wins if thoughts of suicide are present, because then we know we're dealing with it. If what you thought was an invitation really wasn't, and they are not thinking about suicide, they now know that you're someone who would or could listen to suicide talk or any other important issue if they ever did need someone to talk to. Think about the reasons you want to talk and ask about suicide. It's not an accident. They have let you see, hear, sense, or understand things that have brought you to this point of asking. They have a need to tell you, and you can make that much easier by asking them if suicide is what they want to talk about. Consider always using the word suicide. It's a surest way to invite telling. Anything that looks like S-talk will not fulfill this need. Instead, be very direct. Are you thinking of suicide? Are things so bad that you're thinking of killing yourself about suicide? Very, very clear and direct. So when we look at, I need someone to listen, I hope that you're a good listener, the L in talk. I hope you listen to what I need to say, not what you might like me to say. I have not really talked to anyone about suicide. What are good listening skills? It's listening with no judgment, respecting who they are, and allowing them to pour their feelings out to you, that you can hear their story of why they want to die. You know, when they say, I have not really talked to anyone about suicide, can you think about how alone they must feel? Now think about them deciding to live or not to live in that situation. They want to be asked, but everybody around them is missing, dismissing, and avoiding it. They're further getting isolated. They're further thinking that there's no one there to help. They should not be alone. The person at risk can feel how serious the situation is too. When they say, I need to clear my thoughts by talking them through, what you're actually doing them is giving them an opportunity in a safe way to express the pain that they're feeling and the pressure that they're feeling within. because you're loving them to come alongside them, to let them explore how much of a difference it would make to be able to share when everybody else around them previously has not allowed that to occur. Almost all persons at risk have not fully decided that they want to die. Indeed, most have not even decided that they don't want to live. Instead, they truly want to talk to somebody about not wanting to live. Let me say that again. Instead, they want to talk to somebody about not wanting to live. The typical situation is even more encouraging than that. Persons at risk, more often than you might think, can talk themselves out of acting on their thoughts of suicide. Not talk themselves out of the thoughts. That will take longer. If they just have someone who will listen and keep the conversation going. Persons at risk often feel as if they need to solve everything all at once if they're to avoid suicide. They're overwhelmed, in other words. If not that, at least confused about where to start. They're not always conscious of the need for direction, perspective, or guidance. And they'll come to appreciate that they did not have that need sooner or later. In the meantime, take their acceptance of the steps you're suggesting to keep them safe for now as a recognition of this need at some level. The thing the person at risk needs most is someone who understands that their first priority is safety. Safety for now, safety from suicide, and that everything else is secondary. Sometimes people at risk think that need things that create more danger. Two of the most common ones are a request to keep the issue of suicide secret and a reluctance to give up the means of suicide. The ability to make safety first a priority and everything else secondary is just the kind of figuring out a person at risk needs. This perspective includes understanding that any means of suicide should be removed whenever possible, and that thoughts of suicide cannot be kept secret. A helper should never be the only helper. One of the reasons for S-talk is a lack of hope that in situations where thoughts of suicide already exist, nothing can be done to prevent it. So I need to tell someone about my thoughts of suicide. I need someone to ask me about my thoughts of suicide. I need someone to listen to my thoughts and feelings about suicide. And I need help keeping safe from suicide for now. Talk, T-A-L-K. So sometimes the question, should we talk about suicide, is more questions about whether or not help is even possible. If there is nothing anyone can do to prevent suicide in these situations where thoughts of suicide are already present, there's no point in trying. So what do you think? Is it possible to meet these needs? If a helper could do these steps, could they meet these needs? If I'm not asking if you think you could help in this kind of situation, I'm asking if you have hope that there are helpers who can be trained to help, even when thoughts of suicide are already present. Some of you may want to help in that way and are interested in training to be that kind of helper. You were sent some handouts prior to this session that I mentioned earlier, the exploration sheet. Again, once you send us your feedback form, we have several other handouts that we'll provide you with along with your certificate of completion. One outlines all the training opportunities provided by LivingWorks to get this type of training. A second outline provides a program called SafeTalk that provides training in suicide alertness for everyone and focuses upon learning how to do the talk steps. A third outlines ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, and it's a program for learning the skills to deal with the immediate risk that the person is in to do the actual intervention. So now that we have hope that someone can help in the immediate situation, are there other ways to contribute, to do suicide talking, to help prevent suicide in our communities? One way we can help is to start by looking at ways to protect against thoughts of suicide even occurring. Please pull out that exploration worksheet that was sent to you prior to this workshop and look at the second activity, the one about their life-sustaining stuff that you completed earlier, or hopefully you completed before this presentation happened. So you may have wondered why this activity is even here. The word stuff is used to acknowledge that there are so many ways of understanding life that justice cannot be done to them all. Some might view life preserving as a matter of faith, obligation, or reason. Others may experience it as a feeling or picture of a loved one, or never question at all. You can see things in here: faith, financial security, friends, hobbies, recreation, religion, work, things that you might be doing in the future. All of these are things that may sustain your life. It's also important to make all life-sustaining elements stronger, so they are more likely to be available when they are needed. But protection is only part of what we do. One of the last hiding places of S-talk is treating suicide as so abnormal that it cannot be connected to how well we try to preserve and promote life. We believe that efforts to preserve and promote life are not only valuable in their own right, we also believe that they are vital in protecting against suicide. There are three perspectives that are involved in the design of the examples in exercise 3 on your worksheet, on the back of the worksheet: life-protecting efforts, life-preserving efforts, and life promotion. Life-protecting efforts are things one does to protect against suicide, such as learning life intervention skills, or by locking up or securing things in the household that might be used to suicide. Life-preserving efforts are like putting up foodstuffs or preserves for the winter. These are things that we do in advance of an emergency first aid situation to be prepared for it should it occur. An example would be talking to potential emergency first aid resources to see if there are people who you could turn to if you or someone else you knew needed help. Life promotion is aimed at creating and supporting conditions that make life meaningful and valuable. They sustain us in times of trouble, whether the troubles are ours or belongs to those who we care about. This shifting of perspective is critical to developing a broader view of suicide prevention. Take another look at Keep Safe and see it from a more of in here, closer look to a home perspective. Look at the same subject matter as on this slide, but this time from the perspective of a person who might come to be at risk. From this perspective, you might want to think about building your own or help someone that you're close to build their own survival kit. You might want to put reminders in it of things that you hold to life. Include a list of resources. You might want to add notes about what you want to tell those resources. You probably ought to be as specific about what you want them to do as well. You want to suicide safe your environment by means that you or someone you are close to might use for self-harm. So we discovered that there are at least 6 sites where you can begin prevention activities. Starting at home, talking with others, learning help others learn, coordinating the community, and development of policy. The exercise on your worksheet is just a sample of the places you can visit in the matrix. On the handouts we'll be sending later, there's a matrix with more example of suicide prevention activities to take away. The handout is called A Matrix of Suicide Prevention Activities and First Steps in Suicide Prevention. You may agree or may agree more fully that suicide should be talked about. Maybe you're even ready to begin thinking about how to put that attitude into action, how to become a person who will walk that talk. And yet you probably already suspected walk has a meaning, working at living and keeping safe, telling, asking, listening, and keeping safe. So look at the last section of your worksheet on walking the talk. If you want to make a commitment to do something, anything about suicide prevention, this section will help you organize doing that. Put down the date for 1 week from today. On that date, look at the possibilities on the matrix. Others that we talked about are ones that have occurred to you, and decide if you're ready to make a commitment. You'll need training at that activity that you're thinking about and doing involves being a helper who is able to complete the talk steps. That training is called Safe Talk. And what we see here is a person trained in it. It's an individual that we've identified are having thoughts of suicide, coming alongside safely and assisting them to go to the person who is able to help do the interventions. If you want to learn more about Safe Talk, you could read the handout on Learn Suicide Alertness Skills. The rest of these slides highlights the handouts we'd like to send you after receiving your feedback form. If the activity you're thinking about involves school policy, you should look at the handout for suicide prevention in schools. For those with a mental health orientation who envision doing something in a mental health facility, please look at Suicide and Mental Health handout. Lastly, for those who are currently living with someone who's sometimes at risk or has recently attempted suicide, please look over the Living with Risk at Home. So we've explored some of the things that get in the way of talking about suicide, and I hope that now we can perhaps throw the reasons for avoiding talking about it away. You know, as we continue this commitment, the position of suicide in our community can become clearer and clearer. So I'd like you to imagine a suicide safer community where everyone is ready, willing, and able to provide suicide first aid. I hope that you found this time to be beneficial, and I'm available at ken@careforce.us, and we will be sending the handouts out to you once we get your feedback form, and everybody that's registered will also get a copy of a link to be able to watch this video as well. I'd like to open it up for anybody that might have any questions. The way that you would do that is to push down your space bar. It's push to talk, and I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. All right, then. Once again, I thank you for your time, and I wish you all the very best. And thank you for participating in helping us to create a suicide safer community. Blessings to all of you.